This is a special edition of Tales from the Hearth. This edition comes in view of the recent End SARS protests that also claimed the innocent lives of peaceful protesters. Episode 7 is in memory of them. And as a reminder, you can communicate with us via our email, talesfromthehearth@gmail.com. Check the description for more details. We have 2 stories for you. Please pay attention. You went missing. You were taken. Where do we find you? Cell B. Our first story is titled Cell B. The sound of dripping water was the first thing Damola's mind registered when he regained consciousness. The putrid smell was the next to hit him, and his weak stomach muscles involuntarily clenched in repulsion. God, that hurt. It hurt him so bad that his whole body trembled in pain. He knew there was nothing in his stomach to throw up, but his stomach didn't know that. As waves and waves of nausea hit him. He had been in this place for weeks now, yet his body refused to get used to the stench. He tried to distract himself by listening to the sounds around him, but found no comfort in them. He squeezed his eyes shut as he tried to concentrate on an outside sound, but found that sound of dripping water again. That sound has driven him crazy since the day he got here. It dripped all day, but was louder at midnight when most people had departed. Weak and exhausted, he lifted himself on his elbow and winced at the pain as he raised his head towards the high window. All he wanted to see was the moon. He didn't know why, but he just needed to see it. Unfortunately, the moon was also taken to sleep. Its bright eyes were dimmed, and the dark clouds floating around it mocked the boy looking through the window. Battered in body and spirit, the boy sunk back to the floor and winced when his body came in contact with the cold, damp, stinky floor. He was in pain. Every day, he would tell himself that he wasn't getting used to the pain, and every day his body called him a liar. How does one ever get used to this daily torture? A conversation he had yesterday with Afam came to mind. While they stretched out their hands for the 2 slices of stale bread which they got every 2 days. Afam had asked him if he preferred nights to days in here. He had not responded to the question because he had no answer, but there was no respite here. During the day, you were panel beaten, strung up, and tortured for reasons best known to the devils. At night, you find it hard to sleep because of the injuries inflicted on your body and mind. Also, nighttime was when the devils came to choose their product. No, there was no respite for anyone here. Cell B was the highway to heaven. A groan broke through the boy's thoughts. Afam, his mind screamed as he lifted himself on his elbows to peer in the dark at the figure lying on the floor on his side. The boy Afam was angled on a weird position. Damola knew that sound. Afam had peed on himself, and because of the torture they were subjected to, It was hard for one to urinate or take a poop without feeling like his penis or anus was being torn apart. Lucky for Damola, he still had control of his bladder and bowels. But after the torture Afam had gone through earlier that day, he had lost control of his bladder. That groan was a sign of the excruciating pain he was having as he peed uncontrollably on himself. Damola felt tears spring to his eyes as he listened to his friend groan in pain. Those devils had broken Afam's spine while torturing him earlier that day. They had tried to get him to confess to a murder he knew nothing about. A murder that happened 3 local governments away while the both of them watched Premier League at a local bar in the town where they attended university. The devils, officially called SARS for Special Anti-Robbery Squad, had raided the local bar where young men gathered to watch the Premier League on a huge flat-screen TV and arrested every one of them. Damola, Afam, and the other young men had been taken to the station and locked up. The devils had told all of them that they would be allowed to go if they bailed themselves with 150,000 naira. Since Damola and Afam lost their phone during the police raid, there was no way they could call anyone. The SARS men had refused to let them make a call to anyone, and before they knew what was happening, they were accused of murdering a businessman. It has been hell for them, from Cell A, nicknamed Hope Ward, to Cell B, nicknamed Highway to Heaven. Damola knew it would take a miracle to survive Cell B, so he silently wept for himself and his best friend, whom he knew was in much pain than him. Damola got on his sore knees and began to crawl over the bodies between him and Afam, and just as he got closer to his friend, he heard a clanging sound. The devils. Frightened, Damola quickly lay on the floor next to his friend. He ignored his aching body and squeezed shut his eyes as flashlight from a torch bounced off the wall of their cell. He heard the keys jingle as the iron door got unlocked and opened with a loud creak. Damola could smell the cheap heavy cologne and weed as one of the devils strode into the cell and kicked his leg aside to make way for himself. "Shebi na the criminal be this?" the SARS officer asked his colleague standing by the door. Damola's pounding heart filled his ears, so he missed the response the SARS officer got from his colleague. But the next statement pierced through the sound of his pounding heart and left him cold. "It almost go. Be like say na him will be product of the day. Make it no just waste." Damola has been in Cell B long enough to know that product meant organ harvest. The SARS officers didn't really like the prisoners dying in the cells. They made more money selling young men who had been beaten and tortured to the point of death to organ harvesters and ritualists. So, when Damola heard Afam groan in agony, he knew his best friend was the selected product. It was a weeping Damola who grabbed the ankle of the SARS officer and pleaded with him to let his friend live. "Officer, he go better. He go recover. Please don't kill him. We will bring money to give you. He's my friend. My brother. Please." Damola sobbed. Damola was so distraught that he didn't hear the officer standing at the gate step into the cell. But he heard someone yell, "Bastard!" before a boot connected with his head and he blacked out. Damola wasn't awake to see Afam put up a fight despite his broken spine. He wasn't awake to hear Afam's screams as he was led to the room behind cell B, where he was tied to a wooden table like a festive goat. Damola wasn't awake to hear Afam scream for his mother, his father, his sisters, his brothers, and for him, Damola, as he was cut, slashed, and opened like a festive goat. Damola wasn't awake when what remained of Afam's body was dumped into a drum of acid. Where would you like to be? With the living or with the dead? Life comes at you quickly, and your comrades you shall join. Our next and final story is titled, Here Lies Our Comrades. O God of creation, direct our noble cause, guide our leaders right. Olayinka's face broke into a grin as she looked around her. Her fellow protesters, comrades as they called themselves, were belting out the national anthem as if their lives depended on it. The part about guiding our leaders right seemed to touch everyone because it was belted with all the gusto they had. Lord knows that these are politicians need guidance because the lot of them are really weary. Yinka mused as she watched her comrades in protests. The protests she was attending had begun a week earlier, and because she had been worried it would turn violent, she stayed away. That is, until the night of the candlelight procession, when she found she could no longer keep away. The protest, which was peaceful, was dear to her heart because it reminded her of her elder brother, Damola, who went missing in 2010 when she was 10 years old. After reading the horrendous stories about the police unit called SARS, Yinka knew in her heart that they had something to do with his death. Yeah, everyone at home talked about Brother Damola as if he merely forgot the direction to their house, and so would someday find his way back home. It was easier for her parents to believe that. It helped them numb their pain. But for Yinka, she knew he was dead, believed it, and it is for this reason that she had brought Damola's old picture to the candlelight procession held for victims of police brutality. After that night, she knew she was definitely coming back to Lekki Tollgate to join the peaceful protests. As Yinka watched her fellow protesters, her mind flashed to her mother. She had promised her that she would be home before 8 p.m. as she had something to tell her. Yinka needed to tell her mom about a recurring nightmare she'd been having for over a week now. The nightmare always started out with her feet walking into an unpainted but spotless room. It looked like a prison room because of its high window, but was too clean, and every time she walked in, there was a young man with what appeared to be red paint all over him, facing the wall with his back to her. And each step she took closer to the young man seemed to agitate him, although he never turned to face her. And every time she got closer, she would clearly hear him whisper, "Go home." Horrified that her feet would always turn and run towards the door only to find it locked from outside, and the whispers of the young man always got louder as she pounded on the door, begging to be let out, and almost immediately the water would begin to fill the room, while she panicked and banged on the door till the water rose to her jaw. In that nightmare, Yinka didn't know how to swim, so she flailed and kicked weakly as the water rose swiftly and engulfed her. And while she drowned and sunk to the floor of the room, she would catch sight of the young man. He never moved from his spot, and his loud whispers always became a wail. Yinka didn't know what to make of the dream, but she was sure that her mother, a prayer warrior, would know what to do about it. The mother's prayer was a security blanket. The sound of a cheering crowd brought back Yinka's attention to her present. "These coconut heads are really having a great time here at this protest," she mused. "It is much better than violence and chaos," she concluded. For the first time in 20 years of her existence, Yinka felt so proud to be Nigerian and a youth. She knew they would get justice for Damola and other victims of police brutality. Yinka looked at her wristwatch and gasped. 6:40 p.m. It was time to go home. She had been at the protest ground since 12 p.m., and since the light was switched off at the toll gate, the sky looked darker than usual. She needed to go home. Looking around, she checked for a quicker exit and decided it was easier to leave through the barricade in front. Most of the protesters were sitting on the floor, so squeezing past them would be easier than trying to walk through the crowd behind her. So Yinka squeezed past her fellow protesters. Strangers before, but now brothers and sisters united in their demand for accountability and justice. As Yinka moved through the crowd, she returned greetings and smiled back at her comrades, who made way for her. Then, all of a sudden, there was excitement in the air. Some of the protesters who had been sitting rose to their feet and immediately started to sing the national anthem loudly. Yinka's path was blocked, so she paused and peered over the shoulders of the slightly taller young lady in front of her to see the source of the excitement. Soldiers. What are they doing? Gunshots interrupted their thoughts, and panic set in. Some of the protesters started to back away, while some stood their ground. Confused, Yinka didn't know where to go. Forward, backward, sideways. And just as she wheeled her feet to move somewhere, anywhere, Yinka felt something rip through her. Someone behind screamed as Yinka dropped to the floor. Hours later, a truck sped through the Lekki Express. In the back of that truck were bodies of young Nigerians gunned down while they sat peacefully and sang the national anthem at the Lekki toll gate. Perhaps the wind, garnered by the speeding truck, was instrumental in Yinka's jerking awake like someone waking from a bad dream. The pain on the left side of her stomach startled her. It reminded her that she had been shot by Nigerian soldiers, and in that moment, she realized that she wasn't alone. The pain she felt on her side was intensified by the weight of the person laid across her stomach, and when she tried to move her legs, she found it under the weight of another person. Wait a minute. Yinka's mind screamed as it began to dawn on her that her fellow occupants of the truck were dead. They had been shot just like her. The soldiers had shot at peaceful protesters. Yinka began to cry as the coppery smell of blood flooded her senses. She figured there were at least 10 dead bodies in the back of the truck with her. And as the truck sped towards Oworonshoki, Yinka cried and with trembling hands tried to push the body off her. God, he or she was too heavy. She tried again and again, but the body wouldn't budge. Yinka was 5'3" with a lean body. The body strewn across her stomach was bigger than her. The pain on her side intensified from her movement, and she cried out. The truck stopped abruptly. Yinka, worried that she might have alerted them with her cries, squeezed shut her lips as the pain worsened. She couldn't see, it was pitch black, and wherever they were had no electricity. Flashlight beam fell on her and moved quickly over the bodies before it was switched off. She could hear the men. Were they soldiers who shot at them? She wondered. One of the men barked for a rope, and Yinka heard a car door open and close. She heard another truck pull up. Yinka raised her head to see the truck, but the flashlight was turned off, and it was pitch black again. More heavy footsteps made their way toward the truck she was in, and in the blink of an eye, the body on her was pulled off, more like dragged off her. Yinka gritted her teeth as she tried to endure the pain, but now felt in her stomach, but a groan escaped her lips, and in the blink of an eye, a flashlight was beamed at her face. "We have a live one," one of the soldiers exclaimed as he pushed off the body laid on Yinka's ankles and grabbed a hold of Yinka's legs. As he dragged her out of the truck, Yinka sobbed and pleaded with him to take her to the hospital and save her. The soldier flung Yinka to the wet sand and kicked her as she wept and begged to be taken to a hospital. Curled up in a fetal position to protect her head, Yinka sobbed uncontrollably. Her stomach hurt 100 times more in that position. But she had gotten to a place where she knew she was more likely to die from another gunshot than the pain she was feeling. Yinka prayed out loud as she sobbed. She called out to her mother as she sobbed. She called out to her 2 older brothers who were students in the UK university. She called out to the soldiers to have mercy. She called out for her brother, Damala's spirits, to save her. While she was curled up, she didn't see some of the soldiers huddled together to decide her fate. They had put 2 options on the table: to let her go with the others, or take her to the military hospital where she would be treated and monitored lest she talks to the media. They chose one and broke up the brief meeting. Yinka heard the soldiers bark at her to rise up and kneel. Mixed with fear and hope, she clutched her bleeding side and struggled to her knees. Her sobs were now reduced to a bad hiccup. "Look at me!" one of them barked again. A teary Inca slowly lifted her head to look at the soldier and was rewarded with a heavy blow to the side of her head. Inca slumped and passed out for the second time that day. And while she was temporarily suspended in this place where she knew no pain or gun-toting violent soldiers, a bag of sand was secured around her waist with a rope before she was dumped into a lagoon, just like they did with bodies of her fellow comrades in the protest. That has been our stories for this week. This special edition is in memory of the innocent lives lost during the NSAS protest that happened on October 2020. Remember, you can send your own paranormal stories if you would like to hear them read on this podcast. These special stories for this week were written by Adachuku Onwudue and narrated by yours sincerely, the Grizzly. You can follow me on Twitter at CrunchGrizzly. Sound was produced and mixed by Blue Magic OD of Magic City. Also check him out on Twitter at BlueMagic_OD. Tales from the Heart is a production of Creator Library and Publisher, a digital library and publishing platform that provides equitable access to research and knowledge resources. Check it out at www.thecreatorlibrary.com. You can also check the descriptions for all of the details. 2010-20 is the date, and we will never forget.